Rob, thank you for being here today, brother.
Absolutely. I'm super excited to talk with you.
Yeah, me as well. So I was thinking we start with if there was one concept that's had the biggest impact on you and your health, what do you think that would be?
Oh my gosh, this is such a tough one. Uh, for sure, 100% grounding, man.
So, I mean, the answer is why grounding. I know that, or the question is why grounding.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people in the mainstream has this perception of like grounding, things like
Mhm.
EMFs as being this like woo woo thing that doesn't
Yeah,
really have too much great science behind it.
yeah,
But that doesn't really seem like the reality of it.
hmm yeah. And electromagnetic fields are kind of their own discussion, and maybe we can eventually get to that. But I would say it's influenced my life in various different ways. The biggest changes that I've seen in my life are in my sleep, how I think, how relaxed I am. Um, my immune function, my recovery, my performances. It's impacted so many different aspects of my life, and rightfully so, because grounding is just one of those universal regulating factors that by doing it, you're allowing your body to function as it's meant to.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about how I mean, back in the day we used to be grounded 24/7. And
24/7.
nowadays when people are lucky if they're grounded for 5 minutes a day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, 24/7, 365 days, 365 days a year. And really, uh, and from an evolutionary standpoint, we've only introduced kind of these things on our feet, and like especially the rubber soles in the last 100 or so years. And if you really think about it, a lot's happened in that last 100 years as far as non-communicable chronic disease.
And it seems like we need it more than ever now to be grounded because of things like EMF, just like bad food quality. We
Yeah,
just live this like very inflamed lifestyle,
yeah,
and
we're
grounding's a great solution for that.
absolutely, we're constantly exposed to different toxins and radiation. So grounding certainly plays its role in our toolbox of health practices.
Yeah. So I would love to get into like the why behind it. So you mentioned increased sleep, clarity of thought, relaxation,
Mhm.
performance, all these different things.
Yeah.
But why is it that it has this effect?
Yeah. So, well, can I ask you a question first?
Yeah, let's do it.
Before we get into that, what do you think when you think grounding? Like what are like I know you probably have seen some threads on it and everything, but what do you know about it? And then maybe we can go from there.
Yeah. So I know that like we build up this charge within us,
Hmm.
and there's this especially with EMS, they make this charge even stronger. And what grounding does is allow us to discharge this. And that I definitely can go into some anecdotal stuff that it helped with me, but in terms of the more nitty gritty science, like don't know too much of it. Like obviously I've seen a bunch of those graphs where you see like the red blood cells and
Yeah,
the
yeah,
two different photos, but I don't know too much in terms of
yeah,
like the nitty gritty science
yeah.
of it.
Well, you kind of got the basic fundamental mechanism of action right there, in what you just said. It's discharging your body to the same electrical potential of the Earth, and that can be done a couple different ways. It can be done either directly on the Earth, or it can be done inside on a conductive type of material. But yeah, essentially, it's your body equalizing to the same electrical potential of the Earth, and that's all based on charge transfer. So it's your body voltage is going to drop to right around 0 millivolts. More specifically, probably around -100 to -200 millivolts. But that is electrical homeostasis for your body. That is the electrical state that your body is meant to be in. And if that's not directly impacting something in your body, it's going to indirectly impact something, because your body is entirely electrical. It's got an electrical infrastructure. So by being grounded, you're allowing your body to function as it's meant to function.
Electrical homeostasis. I
Yeah,
don't think I've ever heard that term.
yeah. You never hear of you hear of homeostasis, but you never hear about it in terms of the electrical side of things in the body.
So What is that exactly? So it's just the body in this kind of like aligned way, electronic or electrically.
Yeah, so I mean, your body is conductive. There are various processes in your body that rely on electrical signals. Um, the body's matrix, which is something we can talk about later, heavily relies on being connected to the earth. It's a big part of immune function. But yeah, so given how electrical your body is, it makes sense that being in contact with the electrical surface charge of the earth, which you've been in contact for most of our evolutionary history, is going to influence that and allow it to function as it's meant to function. It only makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it makes total sense. And I think about how, like, we quickly mentioned it, but just we have this, like, epidemic of chronic illness.
Mhm. Yeah,
And I think that, or like, my suspicion is that when you are like doing these things like grounding for like 15 plus hours a day and you're in the sun, you're outside,
mhm.
you're living just like a more aligned life. You
Yeah,
can be less strict with your diet and you have like a little bit more freedom to move around and like not get those you, you don't get this like huge inflammation spike from the foods that you eat when you're doing these things.
yeah,
And it's so interesting because it's not something that you hear really too many people talk about.
yeah. It's definitely it's a misalignment with nature, and it's actually so Hippocrates, who's the father of Western medicine, was the one that said, and this is kind of ironic that it's Western medicine because he said that illness arises from small daily sins
Mm.
against nature. So pretty cool.
I'm gonna have to clip that one. That's a great phrase right there. But so you said it's a misalignment, and it's
Yeah,
interesting because you're Native American,
yeah.
and when we think about alignment with nature, we tend to think about the Native American people.
Mhm.
What do you think you've taken away from your culture?
Yeah, so I grew up on a reservation in South Dakota, and in my culture, we've always held high reverence for the earth. We've seen it as healing, and very it's our spirit needs to be aligned with it. And as a child, when I was growing up at these ceremonies and all that, they're just you need to stay close to the earth. The earth can heal you. But when you hear that as a kid, it's just like, I don't really know what's going on. But 20, 22, 23 years later, I start to learn about this stuff. I become obsessed with it. I start writing all the articles, making all the videos about it. And then I kind of start to put two and two together. So science is really just kind of starting to catch up with what people have said in the past, cultures have said in the past. Um, but yeah, it's a cool thing. It's a beautiful thing when your culture can meet science, when spirituality can meet science. But yeah, that's essentially what happened for me. It's a kind of a coming together of the culture that I came from and the science that's available now.
It's funny that you saying that sparked this memory of I forget what who was telling me this, but I think they were kind of making fun of Native Americans because one of their ways of healing was burying somebody in sand,
Mhm.
burying someone in dirt up to the
Yeah.
neck,
Hmm.
and that was a way that they would help heal people who were sick.
Yeah.
And if you think about the stuff we talked about, like
Yeah.
that's a great way
Yeah.
to help people,
Ground somebody, man.
ground somebody.
That's we didn't do that in my tribe, but I can imagine it'd certainly be a thing in other tribes. So
Yeah.
the tribes are so vastly different throughout the United States. So
And I think that, I mean, we live these lives that are so disconnected from nature, like we talked about throughout this episode. How do you think you've been able to reintroduce this alignment in your own life since you are now living a more somewhat modernized lifestyle? Like, how do you kind of fuse those two things together?
how do I keep grounding into an integral part of my life? Living
Just
a
kind of alignment of nature,
okay.
not specific to just grounding, but obviously grounding as well.
Um, I try and live as natural of a life that I possibly can to the best of my ability. I live in a decently industrialized area. I live in a building where there's a lot of wiring, there's a lot of appliances, So I do the best I can to kind of mitigate the unnatural, the EMFs, the non-natural light, the poisonous food, the toxic food. I do my best to limit myself to that, but really, you can only do so much. You can only do so much in today's day and age because you're constantly exposed to this stuff. But as far as grounding goes, I'm grounded for up to like 18 hours a day, so I make that a priority for sure.
So how do you stay grounded for that long?
Well, I sleep grounded
Okay.
for one, so that's 8 to 9 hours right there. I work grounded most of the day in the either barefoot or in my sandals. Even when I'm at my computer, and I've got a mat underneath my computer right now. That's a grounding mat. Kind of serves as a mouse pad too. So and that's connected to the building's ground connection. So that's up to 18 hours a day grounded.
So you mentioned your sandals, and that's
Mm-hmm.
something that before I found your content, I didn't really like believe too much that like these sandals and stuff like that could ground you.
Mm-hmm.
What's the reality when it comes to like your product and just
Mm-hmm.
these more like grounding socks and like stuff like that?
Yeah, so going back to right to the beginning of our conversation, what is grounding? It's just being in electrical contact with the earth. And what do you need to be in electrical contact with the earth if you're not barefoot? Well, you need a conductor. You need a conductor underneath your feet. And so the thing with the sandals is that there's copper in there, there's silver in there. Those are two of the best conductors in the world. So all you need is a very small point of contact with the earth. There's a conductor there that allows that charge transfer to occur. It might not be as good as being barefoot as far as the total surface area being exposed to the earth, but it works, it grounds you, especially in times where it's not always convenient to be barefoot.
100%. Because like so like the one of the reasons why I asked is because there's so many people who live in like these big cities, and like I think about New York City, for example. Like I'm in
Yeah.
New Jersey at the moment, only a few minutes away, and when I
Mhm.
walk around the city, I like consciously has thought about how hard it would be to ground in this place.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you have to go all the way to Central Park, and then like that's the
Mhm.
only place that you could be grounded. So like living in these like city lives, I was curious of your take on how we can better become aligned with nature.
Well, concrete is actually fine. A lot of industrial areas, concrete will ground you just fine because really, it comes down to knowing your insulators, your conductors. So conductors are these materials that they hold on to their electrons pretty loosely. So that means electrical energy can pass through them pretty easy. Insulators, on the other hand, they hold on to their electrons really tight, and it makes it difficult for electrical energy to pass through them. But cement concrete is mostly mineral. It's mostly water, so it can conduct electricity, especially when it gets wet. Asphalt, on the other hand, is a different story. But for the most part, if you're in an industrialized area, concrete works just fine.
That's interesting. I don't think I've ever realized that or even like thought about that that's
Mhm.
like possible.
Yeah, and that's the one of the biggest questions I get in my messages. Am I grounded here? When am I grounded? How long do I ground? All those kinds of questions. But am I grounded here is like the one of the biggest questions. So as long as you can tell the difference between a conductor and an insulator, and really that's just a Google search away, like, and you'll know if you're grounded. So
From those I'm sure you got so many people hitting you up with questions about grounding and just
yeah.
living this type of lifestyle.
Mhm.
Is there any like really good questions that stand out to you, that you think would help people a lot?
Um, There's a couple I think that come to mind. One is so I like the people that ask why. Like why is grounding, because that's how I am, and like it's nice to see all of like these Twitter threads and stuff where it's just like grounding reduces inflammation and all that. But like I'm the type of person that asks why. Why exactly is it doing that? So I like when people are able to um ask specific questions like that, because that makes me feel better about teaching them about what's going on exactly, because I think that's ultimately what's going to convince people is the hard science of how grounding works exactly in your body, and then they can relay that message to other people. And then it's not so much woo woo, because like when you tell people to go ground because it reduces inflammation and it's just good for you, that's not good. Like that's not going to convince anybody. And that was a big problem that I had when I would hear people talk about grounding on podcasts. It's just like, it's so unconvincing. And so I kind of just wanted to step in and be a voice for grounding and provide kind of that proof of concept and be able to convince people. Because really, I don't need a lot of time with somebody to convince them that grounding works. You give me 30 minutes, you give me an hour with somebody, I can completely convince that grounding is a thing and it'll help them. So that's I like the really specific questions that people ask me as far as the mechanisms. But another question is, this might be the most common question. It's how long should I ground,
Yeah.
aka how little can I get away with to get benefits from it. And really, that's a very subjective thing. I mean, your body's meant to be grounded 24/7, 365, as you said earlier. But it also depends on someone's inflammatory preparedness, and that's a whole different conversation by itself. Give me 1 sec. I'm gonna change this battery out.
No worries. Perfect. So you quickly mentioned, you said, I forgot the exact phrasing you used,
Oh,
but
and inflammatory preparedness. Yeah, yeah.
inflammatory preparedness.
Mhm.
So is that does that mean, as like, if you are incredibly inflamed, you're going to need more grounding? If you're less inflamed, you're going to need less grounding? Is that kind of what you mean by that?
Yeah, it's the inflammatory state that you're currently in, and part of that is how saturated your electron stores are in the body. So there are particular structures within the body that hold on to charge, and they basically act as this whole body redox regulation system, and that's a big part of the immune system. So I suppose a good direction we can take this is to the immune system, because that's like the number one thing you see about grounding is it reduces inflammation. Well, why is it reducing inflammation? So I don't know if you want to go into that, we can go into that.
I
Um,
absolutely want to go into that. And
yeah,
I'll tell you the reason why it's particularly interesting to me
yeah,
is what got me into this world was I had a autoimmune skin condition.
hmm
And one of the things that like fascinated me was I would spend a lot of time in Puerto Rico. And when I was in Puerto Rico, like, I was less worried about my diet. I was more just like enjoying myself. But while I was there, I was grounded almost 24/7, like getting up for sunrise, watching sunset, like being outside all day barefoot. Um, and I realized I would never have a skin reaction when I was in Puerto Rico. And I've come to realize and learn that it's because of grounding.
yeah, yeah. Um, Yeah, and there's many cases of that. There's many anecdotal reports of that, of grounding helping them in their autoimmune conditions. But yeah, that's a chronic inflammatory condition. So what's the number one killer worldwide? It's chronic inflammatory disease. You have heart disease, you have cancer, you have diabetes, you have neurodegenerative diseases, you have autoimmune conditions. These are all chronic inflammatory diseases. And so when you're looking at what can potentially alleviate these conditions, you need to find the common denominator that exists between all of them. And what's a common denominator that exists? Well, inflammation, but also, so grounding isn't directly reducing inflammation. It's actually it's dealing with its evil twin sister. I don't want to say evil, but it's necessary. And that's oxidative stress. So I don't know if you've heard of oxidative stress, but it's essentially an imbalance between the free radicals in your body and the antioxidants. So what's commonly said about grounding is that it's an antioxidant, and it can act as an antioxidant. It's a very potent antioxidant, and it acts different than other antioxidants. It's I would say probably the best antioxidant you can provide your body with. So let's I guess we can talk a little bit about inflammation and oxidative stress. So where you find one in the body, you'll likely find the other: inflammation, oxidative stress, and all in all of these conditions. And it's very heavily researched. It's well published. You do any search in PubMed right now, and you look up inflammation, oxidative stress, and disease, and you'll likely find a plethora of different resources for that information. But so it's obviously an active area of research. So yeah, a lot of these conditions have this oxidative stress inflammation going on, and so these free radicals. I'm sure you've heard of free radicals before. The technical terminology for these molecules is reactive oxygen species. And these can be very detrimental to the body. They can be very damaging to the body, but they're also very necessary. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. So, and there's a couple different ways that these reactive oxygen species are created. And one way is through cellular respiration, and another way is through immune function. So when people think of oxygen, they typically think of, the life sustaining characteristics, attributes of it. But it's actually, so when the body utilizes oxygen in cellular respiration, particularly in the electron transport chain, there's a series of complexes within the electron transport chain in the inner mitochondrial matrix. These electrons, so there's a proton gradient, but there's also electrons being passed through these complexes in the electron transport chain. And so these electrons can essentially get leaked from the electron transport chain and prematurely interact with oxygen. And that leads to the improper reduction of molecular oxygen to produce superoxide. And the further reduction, you're going to get hydrogen peroxide and hydroxyl radical, which are all kind of damaging in their own right, but they're also very useful as signaling molecules and immune function. But they can build up. They can build up over time. Your body has a defense system in place to kind of combat these reactive oxygen species. These are its own endogenous antioxidants like superoxide dismutase, catalase, things of that sort. And there's also non-enzymatic antioxidants. These are things you can get from your diet, vitamin C, vitamin E. But these chemical antioxidants, they work differently. They work differently than what I like to call conducted antioxidants, because really what it comes down to fundamentally is bound electrons versus unbound electrons. So unbound electrons can traverse the body much easier, much more efficiently than bound electrons. So like chemical antioxidants have much more barriers to overcome, especially if you're getting them from your diet. They got to get through the digestive system without being destroyed. They got to get through the circulatory system to get to where they need to be. Conducted antioxidants, on the other hand, free mobile electrons from the earth, can semiconduct through the body's conductive infrastructure, and that allows them to be much more superior as an antioxidant. So essentially, you have something that can very efficiently quench the fire in your body, and that's this oxidative stress that's implicated in so many different conditions.
That's such a great summary there. And so those conducted antioxidants, really at the end of the day, like that's the reason why it's going to improve the immune system.
Yeah,
Ultimately.
and so I missed a kind of a fundamental point there. Is what does an antioxidant do, and what does a reactive oxygen species need? So a reactive oxygen species essentially has one or more unpaired electrons in their outer orbital, and so they need to either give up an electron or they need to donate an electron, and that ultimately makes other molecules more unstable. And so what these antioxidants do is they essentially donate or accept electrons to stabilize those reactive species. So that's how the chemical antioxidants work. And the conducted antioxidant works very much in the same way, but it's not. So it also places extra kind of energy demands on getting rid of those antioxidants once they've donated their electrons.
I think I lost you here.
Oh. One sec. I think I got it fixed.
We're good.
you connected to the speaker. You connected to the speaker in my bathroom. But yeah, so that allows grounding electrons from the earth to kind of be the most superior antioxidant. I was just on a call last night with Vance, who's, I don't know if you know Vance, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I was on. We were talking about methylene blue last night, so that was a really fun conversation because we got into like mitochondrial respiration and how methylene blue affects that. So it was a really fun conversation.
I just bought his product the other day.
Hmm.
But methylene blue is an interesting conversation because of the antioxidant properties of methylene blue.
Yeah.
But it seems like it has like a synergistic effect when you are in the sun and grounding. Like all
Hmm.
these things kind of all work together.
Hmm.
Is there some truth there?
I can tell you what I know about methylene blue. I'm not as extensively researched on it as Vance, but so you got the brain, which is like 2% of our body's weight, but consumes up to like 20% of the oxygen in our body.
Mm-hmm.
So because of that high oxidative metabolism, it's predisposed to a lot of oxidative stress. Because kind of going back to what we talked about earlier, it's in cellular respiration that creates a lot of these reactive species. So a lot of reactive species get produced in the brain. It's got a limited antioxidant capability as opposed to like other tissues. There's a high lipid content in the brain, so it's very much prone to lipid peroxidation as a result of oxidative stress. Um, so where methylene blue comes in is that, remember when I was talking about the electron transport chain and these electrons essentially getting leaked out? So methylene blue comes in and it essentially kind of soaks up these leaked out electrons and shuttles them to the terminal acceptor of the electron transport chain, which is oxygen, to ultimately form water. So that does a couple things. Is It helps in alleviating oxidative stress in the brain, protecting neuronal cells, and then on top of that, it's indirectly helping with ATP production. So you've got energy production as well as protection against oxidative stress. So it's a couple interest, and I only know that because that's very similar to grounding science.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of way cooler things that methylene blue does that I'm so like uninformed on, but I'm sure Vance could tell you about that for sure.
So I'm so curious about the fact that when we talk about these antioxidants and the conducted versus non-conducted and how like grounding has this profound effect on the, I want to say like better antioxidants or these
Hmm.
conducted antioxidants. Um, are like doctors aware of this stuff? Like, do you like are they taught are they taught anything when it comes to, or are they even aware that there's like this difference there, like that there's this profound effect?
I I think good doctors are, but man, at the end of the day, grounding is it's free. Nobody's making any money off of it. A good a good a good provider is someone that doesn't want you to be on anything. He doesn't want to see you very often. He wants you to be off of medications, all these things. And grounding is one of those things that it doesn't make anybody any money. It's not making pharma any money. So I don't know if it's ever going to be pushed to the extent that I like it to be pushed. Just because there's that money factor in it. Nobody's making any money off of it. Um, but yeah, I think there are good doctors out there that are aware of it. A lot of the providers that I've researched who really push this stuff have provided a lot of insight on how grounding impacts the body, and that's heavily inspired me in all the stuff that I've written. So I do believe there are some really good doctors out there that are prescribing something free. Just go be barefoot, go try it out, see how it impacts your health, and come back to me and we'll see where things go. But for the most part, no, I don't think doctors really know about this stuff yet, and I don't know if there even is a desire to, because of that kind of that free free aspect of it. Nobody's making any money off of it, so.
We gotta have you come out with the Earth and Water book so I could start shilling it out to all these doctors.
Yeah, I'm looking at the comment too.
Yep.
Any book recommendations on the topic of grounding. I would highly recommend mine when it's ready.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, so that's Earth and Water, and that is basically the grounding Bible. So, and it's called Earth and Water, a short story of life's matrix, and it's something I've been working on for a couple years. It's written, and I'm just kind of sexying it up right now. I'm making some more illustrations and everything, which is kind of, man, the illustrations are a whole different story. It's a really beautiful thing to look at. But there is a book that you can get right now. In the meantime, it's the Earthing book, which is kind of a really kind of elementary introduction to grounding. But what Earth and Water is, it's a mix between kind of a story as well as kind of that textbook style if you need that. Like that hard science is in there if you need that, but it's also a good story of life's matrix, and water is a big part of that, and that's why I called it Earth and Water, because these are two very fundamental elements to your health. So I think it'll help a lot of people, and they'll find it really, really interesting, and I think they'll really like it.
I'm looking forward to reading it. And
Yeah.
one thing I love to ask people who have just finished writing a book is, what did they think coming in was different than, or did they have any beliefs coming into the book that they thought they were going to write about? And in further research for the book, they're like, oh no, that's actually not the case.
Um, Not necessarily for most of it, because this is stuff like I've been around for like the last 5 years. So I was already pretty well aware and well researched on a lot of this stuff. There was one chapter I struggled with a little bit more than others, and that was the Earth and EMF chapter. So that was a bit struggling um, I struggled to write it, but yeah, for the most part, no, man, everything aligned pretty well with what I knew in the past, and the current research as well. So, and really, this book relies on about 30 primary publications as far as grounding science goes, and then the rest of the sources of information I use are mostly from like PubMed and stuff like that. But it's all supporting information. But the whole book itself is based on, around 30 grounding publications, along with some water publications. So
Why was that EMF chapter so much harder to write?
yeah, and I might run into trouble with some people right now, but so like here's the thing. I definitely think non-natural electromagnetic radiation affects health. But if you were to, let's say, pull up PubMed right now, or whatever database you will, and you look up all of the research on EMF and health, it's really interesting because at the end of the day, you're not going to find a consensus as far as the literature goes. There's a lot of people that say don't worry about it, it's fine, and there are a lot of people that say it's going to absolutely wreck your health. So that was a struggling chapter for me to write, even though there is good data, there is good literature out there as far as the negative health implications of it, especially leukemia. Leukemia is well researched as far as its association with exposure to electromagnetic, man-made electromagnetic fields. And then on top of that, so there's a common assertion that grounding protects you against electromagnetic fields, which is not entirely true. It's partly true. So Richard Feynman, who is essentially considered the Einstein of the second half of the 20th century, he said that when the body is grounded, it essentially becomes an extension of the Earth's electric field that pushes away ambient electric fields from your body. The magnetic fields are a different story, because you can't repel those, and so you need very special types of materials to repel those. And magnetic fields by themselves can induce currents on and in your body. That's Faraday's law of induction. So there's really no kind of getting around that part. So the assertion that grounding protects you against EMFs isn't, well, the EMFs that we're concerned with, which is extremely low frequency electromagnetic fields and radio frequencies. So that assertion is it's partially true. It's not entirely true. I went a long time thinking that it just fully protected me, but it doesn't. It does not.
Damn, that's interesting because I thought that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think there is like other things that could protect you?
There's certain materials that can protect you against magnetic fields. I can't think of it off the top of my head. Starts with an F. But yeah, I would just advise somebody to Google search that. I'm not sure the exact material, but there are materials out there that can protect you. I think it's so like Faraday cages were pretty popular, I believe, for repelling things like that. But really, it just you need a very specialized type of material to kind of deflect that type of radiation.
So you've mentioned the word matrix a few times in this episode, and
Yeah.
I made a note to come back to it. And when people think of matrix, I definitely don't think they're thinking of the type of matrix that you're referring to. So what
Yeah.
do you mean when you refer to the matrix?
The matrix is an extremely monumental part of the whole grounding process. So and all of the individual benefits that you see threads on Twitter or Instagram and all that, these are really cool, but you're kind of missing out on the bigger picture of what grounding is doing for your body. And so I wrote about this and I call it the big three. So I tried to boil what grounding is doing on a most fundamental level and why. And so all of these benefits are kind of stemming from these basic three things. One is that it increases the density of negative charge in your body, and that contributes to its electrical homeostasis, which is going to impact everything in your body. That's one. Number two is that it attenuates the inflammation oxidative stress response, the excessive inflammation oxidative stress response. And that has to do with the antioxidants and all that we talked about earlier. And then number three is that it charges the water protein matrix battery. And that's where the matrix comes in. So when I say matrix, I'm referring to all of the connective tissue in your body, and that's fascia, that's tendons, that's ligaments, that's blood, that's bones. It's very, very extensive. And though that connective tissue, a big part of that is the extracellular matrix, and we can talk about that soon. But I do want to emphasize this matrix is the only system in your body that has a direct contact with every cell in your body. So these connective tissues are further connected to these integrins, which basically traverse cell membranes. They go into the cell, and even further, those connect to the cytoskeletons, kind of the scaffolding that keeps that gives the cell its shape, but it does much more than that. And then further, that cytoskeleton connects to these link complexes, which ultimately goes into the actual DNA itself. And so it's essentially this super highway that energy can transfer itself through very, very efficiently, very, very quickly. But there's a particular component of this matrix. It's called ground substance. And what ground substance is it's these glycoconjugates, these proteoglycans, these glycosaminoglycans, particularly these glycosaminoglycans. They're heavily sulfated. So they trap a lot of water, but they're also negatively charged. So these are dispersed throughout your entire body. So essentially you have this massive store of negative charge throughout your body that can be utilized for various different processes, ATP production, immune function. So when you ground, you're essentially charging up that ground substance, along with the water that's in contact with this whole matrix system, because water interacts very interestingly with these hydrophilic surfaces and the matrix. So it's essentially this body-wide battery that gets charged up through grounding. Another good ways is through infrared radiation, among other things. But I'm most concerned with the grounding side of things.
So that's why the book is called Earth and Water. It's that
That's why
second half there.
that's why the book is called Earth and Water. Yep.
So it's interesting. So you mentioned extracellular matrix.
Mm-hmm.
That's something different from what you just described.
So no, the extracellular matrix is part of the okay. It's part of the matrix. So connective tissue, like all the bones, the blood, the tendons, the fascia. So that's mostly extracellular matrix. So connective tissue is a collection of cells, fibers, and ground substance. So it's when you look at a tissue, it's not mostly made up of cells. It's mostly made up of the space around cells, and that's the extracellular matrix. So this is what's making up a large part of your body, along with water, and the proteins that make up those structures. Because protein is the main macromolecule in the body. But yeah, the matrix is an extremely interesting thing that I try to really hammer down whenever I talk about grounding.
So it's that space between the cells.
Space between the cells. Yep. Yep.
Fascinating.
It's the most pervasive system in the body. Again, the only system that has a direct contact with every cell in the body, and it just hasn't been separated as kind of its own system because of how pervasive it is, because of how involved it is with everything in your body, especially in Western medicine. It's not really considered its own system, and really, I think the Meridian system plays into that too. That's kind of a whole another conversation. But the Meridian system, at least from an electrical standpoint, is essentially this low impedance pathway for electrical energy to get through your body. So I think that's in large part how the Meridian system works, as far as improving health and stimulating that. But yeah, so that's essentially what the matrix is. So and it's a fun chapter for sure. So I think people will really like it.
It's this whole world of grounding and earth and water, let's call it. It's so interesting, and it's particularly interesting to me because when we look at health and even like functional medicine type of doctors, we have this like everyone's so focused on diet, and it's like everyone views diet as like this one thing that's going to have the biggest impact on everything, but it seems like it's this much more like holistic, nuanced approach that I don't think too many people are taking in all these things in consideration.
Yeah. And I think we've been doing a pretty good job as far as I don't want to say an amazing job, but we really hammer the nutrition side of things. We really hammer the activity side of things. Those are all really, really, really good for your health. But as far as, I think we've neglected the electrical aspect of our body and maintaining that electrical homeostasis. And groundings, it's been one of those things that's been severely neglected when people talk about improving health, and I think that's much to our detriment. But yeah, and I did want to bring up another interesting point. It might be kind of a little off key here, but I don't think we actually have been studying normal organisms. I think we've been studying insulated organisms, because the grounded organism, it functions very differently, especially in terms of like immune function. So when we do all these studies, these experiments, there's a lot of standardized procedures that need to be followed for that experiment to take place. one thing that isn't standardized is the electrical environment of those experiments. And so, these experimental subjects, are they exposed to 50 to 60 hertz alternating currents that are going to induce a voltage on them? So I think in the future, I hope that these experimental environments, they have a more standardized electrical environment, because the grounded organism operates so much differently than the insulated organism. So yeah, and that's a point that I bring up in the book too. It's really interesting, and potentially has a lot of implications as far as what we actually know about how the body works.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective because you think about all these studies that have been done and on literally you could say anything, right? And
Hmm.
if you're not controlling for grounding or controlling for
Hmm.
these
Yeah,
electrical currents, like I wonder what that would change up.
yeah, yeah. And then on top of that, what are norms? What are norms based on? Are these based on like healthy people? So that's another thing too. So there's a lot of aspects to research and publications that I think we need to really take a closer look at, as far as, healthy are these healthy organisms? Are they grounded organisms? So
What do you think about diet nowadays? Do you have like do you follow a diet? What's like a day eating for you? What type of things are you consuming?
yeah, I just like to clarify, I'm not a nutrition expert, nor do I have any desire to be, because that is such a difficult subject to get down, and things are always changing, which yeah, so you're constantly having to reconfigure how you think, or how these specific nutrients impact the body. So I eat pretty much the same thing every day. I actually, and this is not a good thing because I'm an athlete, I actually struggle to eat. I struggle to eat enough throughout the day. So I'm a really kind of lean individual. You can literally see the vasculature going down my thighs of a very low body fat percentage. So I need to eat more, and I struggle with it. But during most of the day, I won't eat. I won't eat hardly anything. Maybe have some tea in the morning. But I do most of my eating before bed. I'll have usually some steak, like a really really big steak. With that, maybe some steamed broccoli, and then a very large protein shake, casein protein shake with collagen and frozen fruit, and um, yeah, that's pretty much it. And I do that every day. So I don't get tired of it either. Like I don't get tired of steak. I don't get tired of nice seasoned steamed broccoli and the protein smoothie. But yeah, I'm not, nutrition isn't really my forte. I grew up on a reservation, a lot of natural foods. I ate a lot of buffalo growing up, a lot of potatoes, a lot of vegetables. So yeah, that's about the extent that I know about nutrition, which isn't much, and that's how I eat. So
So you're pretty much going one meal a day for
yeah, pretty much. I just and a big part of that is just kind of like I'm busy. I'm busy too. Like I'm constantly going all day, so I don't really have time to think about food. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it's okay to fast for, at least 12, 13 hours a day. That's obviously very context dependent and subjective, but for me, my workouts go fine. My mental clarity is great. I don't really have a high craving for to eat or anything. So um, yeah.
well, Rob, dude, thank you for doing this today. And I want to kind
Yeah.
of end here with I have two questions actually before we end here. The first one
Mm.
is there anything like fundamental that we haven't discussed today that you think is really crucial to talk about?
Um, like in what context?
More in the context of your work and the stuff that
Mhm.
you talk about.
Well, that can be either health or it can be business.
Mm,
So I think we've talked a lot of health today. So maybe business. Maybe we can talk a little bit about business. So I would say, so a lot of people are kind of trying to get their own little niche going in the Twitter sphere and the Instagram sphere, and they're trying to get their business going and everything. And something that I see a lot, that I think is hindering a lot of people's growth. And I'm not a business expert by any means, I'm not a marketing expert, but something that really turns me off is the constant regurgitation of information that I see. It's such a lack of ingenuity, and genuineness. And I wish people would be more genuine with the information that they put out. There needs to be more passion behind it, and you kind of got to add your own uniqueness to it, because there's a lot of people on Instagram and Twitter that have their own businesses, and there's there's no there's no it's it's hard to separate them from other people in that niche, just because they're constantly throwing around like the same stuff. They rephrase it, they copy and paste it, and I think that holds a lot of people back. So it would be nice to see more genuineness and uniqueness in what people are putting out there, and that's a huge thing that I emphasize with what I do. Like, it's nice to talk about grounding and everything, but if I'm not contributing in some way, shape, or form, if I'm not adding like insight to that, and trying to help the field and genuinely move it forward, um, then a lot of what I would do, I think it would turn people off. So
Another thing on that topic that I think you particularly do really well is
mhm,
it's like the Bruce Lee analogy I like to say is like um,
mhm,
Bruce Lee wasn't like this love guy just for being like a martial artist or an actor or a philosopher. It was like all those
mhm,
three things put together, and like
mhm.
these three things that people initially don't. It doesn't seem like they go together perfectly, but
Yeah,
then when you have this guy who talks about all three of these different topics,
yeah.
it brings in that person who's like, I love philosophy and I love martial arts. Then they're like this super fan because
Mhm,
this guy's combining different topics that
yeah.
no one else is really talking about.
Yeah, and I've got kind of a little bit of a diverse background. So like, I studied physics. I'm an athlete. I run track. I do some amateur kickboxing fights, stuff like that. And then, dude, I like to create. I like to illustrate things. So it's a good mixture of art, science, athletics, and I think that brings a lot of uniqueness to what I do. And I think a lot of people pick up on that and they like that, and that's nice. It's a good place to be. I think it draws a lot of people to me, and ultimately to grounding. But I would say that's one fundamental thing. I did want to mention another fundamental thing, that kind of goes back to grounding a little bit. Um, and I mentioned this earlier in the week. It's I think people kind of see this grounding thing as an enhancer, and really it's not an enhancer of anything. It's a balancer. So what grounding essentially does is it allows your body to operate normally. It kind of brings it back to its default state. So if grounding is going to attenuate something, or if it's going to augment something, it's going to essentially just bring you back to the middle. So it's very context dependent. It's very subjective what grounding is going to do for your body, depending on what you're struggling with, what you're dealing with specifically. So grounding is going to take you to that point. So I can't say specifically what grounding is going to do for you, because it's so subjective. It affects a lot of people differently.
That's a great point and a great distinction. It's a balancer, not
Hmm.
enhancer.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
cool. But one thing when you were talking before about like what you do and the business side of things, um, it's an interesting conversation. I think people are drawn to guys who are like scholar athletes and these
Hmm.
people who have this like they really are trying to grow their mind and they're also
Yeah.
building their body. And I
Yeah.
think like this more complete human is what like people are drawn to ultimately.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and that definitely it brings kind of multiple spectrums together. It gives you such an interesting outlook on how to approach things. You get the discipline and various aspects of athletics, and you get the rigor of kind of that science background. At least for me, being very you're very you can be tedious. You can deal with numbers and mathematics and really difficult concepts. And then I have kind of the art side too, because I do a lot of those illustrations for my book, and so I get to play with these things on a daily basis, and it really shapes the way that I think about things and my mindset. And I guess that's been good for as like a marketing thing, because that's like one of the number one things I get compliments on is the marketing. And then I didn't study marketing. I don't really know anything about marketing. I just try and create genuine things. I try and create emotion. And I think that's what draws a lot of people in.
It reminds me of this quote from Da Vinci, which is to develop a complete mind, study the art of science and the science of art.
That's beautiful.
And it's
That's
just like,
beautiful.
yeah,
Very applicable.
very applicable. And I wonder, I mean, I'm curious for you, like, do you think that the illustration helps with the science and the science helps with the illustration in terms of not in the branding sense, but in just in terms of the actual quality of work?
Hmm. Maybe maybe indirectly. I would I wouldn't know how specifically, but so hmm, it's kind of that's a tough question. Perhaps maybe indirectly. It certainly, coming from the background that I come from, and making this art, these illustrations and stuff. It's beautiful. Like, it turns out beautiful. So something is obviously happening, but I couldn't give you an exact mechanism on why that's going on.
How long have you been running Gaia for?
I'm going on 4 years,
For
but
years.
I was doing, yeah, and I was obsessed way before that though, and so the grounded athlete kind of came about after, I think, like a 2 years of me being obsessed with this whole practice, and so eventually I started to make a platform, an educational platform about it, to teach people about it. Um, and then it just kind of turned into this. And there's Gaia. I'm glad that the Earth and Water book is almost done, and then we have Aries too. So hopefully I'll have Aries done by the end of the year. So it's
What's
all been
Aries?
Aries is a grounding shoe.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
dope.
yeah. So it's something that I've been working on for a long time now. Um, so yeah, the whole thing with barefoot shoes, and so grounding shoes exist, but honestly, man, they look really lame. A lot of them look really lame. They look kind of goofy to put on. So I wanted something that looks badass, but also gets the job done. So that's what Aries is, and
Yeah.
it's very much in the same aesthetic of Gaia, because it's that Greek mythology. You have Gaia, the Greek goddess of the earth, and you have Aries, the Greek god of war.
Mm.
So, and that's very much symbolic of multiple things. So
I'm looking forward to trying it. Are you a big Greek mythology guy?
I love Greek mythology. When I was in high school, I would always love the Greek mythology parts of the semester. Like, that was my shit. I really liked it.
Do you know why it stands out to you?
um, Not necessarily. It's probably something superficial, like the aesthetic of it. I like how the art is. I like how, they portrayed their men just like huge, jacked, sculpted people, and then um, you see all the movies and everything about Greek gods and goddesses, and you read about the Odyssey and everything. It's just a um, very fascinating realm that I think just enchants a lot of people, and I was just one of those people. So, and that's it just kind of carried over into a lot of the things that I do. So
It's cool too. Just think about how long ago, like this Greek culture, um, how long ago it happened, and just how fundamental it is to like almost all of our beliefs. Like it's so cool to see
Hmm.
how they were able to get a hold of almost everything.
Yeah, yeah. Another thing that influenced me is my so I'm a Christian, and that has whole kind of shaped what I do too, because I don't think anything that I teach is out of alignment with Christianity. You know, God created man from the dust of the ground, into his nostrils he breathed the breath of life. That's Genesis 2:7. So I really, at the end of the day, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to connect people. I'm trying to connect God's people to this healing planet that he has created for us. And I can give you the mechanisms of that exactly. But at the end of the day, that's what I'm trying to do. Is I'm just trying to connect more people. That's the main message. I'm not trying to sell people on anything. Really, I'm trying to sell people on just going outside and being barefoot. If you're in sandals, cool. If you're not, great.
The religious stuff is it's so powerful for so many reasons, but like the one that as I start to get older stands out for me is just we all need to like worship something. And if you're not
Mm-hmm.
worshiping something like a god, you end up
Mm-hmm.
worshiping pleasure or just
Yeah.
these things that aren't going to move the needle for you in a positive direction.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
having that like north star that you truly like believe in and want to
Yeah.
move towards, it changes everything.
Yeah. That's an incredible point. We all worship something, but some people just choose to worship God.
Yeah.
So
Awesome. And so, Rob, if someone heard this conversation today and they're like, that was kind of a lot of information thrown at me. I don't really know all of these specifics. What should I do from a tactical side of things to get some of these results and to start moving the needle in the positive direction? What would you tell them?
you don't need you don't need to start off grounding as much as I do. 18 hours a day, 5 minutes a day is fine. 10 minutes a day is fine. Anything is better than nothing. And then, yeah, you brought up a good point. If you want to know more of the specifics of what's going to happen to your body when you ground, I have a treasure trove of that information on my Instagram, on my website, even on the Twitter. Sometimes on the Twitter, you'll get a little bit of my personality in there too, which, sometimes rub people the wrong way, but it's,
Good for the brand.
yeah, but, yeah. And just experiment. Like it doesn't matter what I say right now. Go try it out for yourself. See how it makes you feel. If you feel better, that's all you need. That's all you need right there. And I hope this inspires a lot of people to go out there and try it for themselves.
So I just noticed that Jod is in the Twitter space right now, and he
Yeah,
tweeted something a few days ago that was so funny to me because it stood out so much in terms of how relatable it was. Is he was
yeah.
saying when you start grounding, you almost become addicted to it in the sense that like you see a patch of grass on the side of the road and you just take your shoes off and for some reason like I feel that that's true. There's like an addictive element to it.
hmm Well, once you start feeling it, once you start realizing how it makes you feel, you're gonna crave that all the time, and that's a good craving to have. I would love for everybody to have that craving, but I totally get that too, because like when I see, because I'm often in like a highly cemented area a lot of the time. I see a little patch of grass, I'm like, oh, nice, that's my shit. I'm gonna go stand over there for a little bit. So,
Absolutely. Well, Rob, dude, I can't thank you enough for this episode today. It was a blast to
yeah.
record, and I appreciate you taking time.
Absolutely, Ryan. It's been fun. I'm always excited to talk about grounding, and hopefully it inspires a lot of people to go try it out for themselves, and then maybe get back to me. Message me, tell me how it makes you feel. So,
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for listening. Catch you guys next time. Peace.
yeah. Later.